Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is HarrisX founder and CEO, Dritan Esho. Dritan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
I can't believe I'm saying it, but we are finally less than a week away from Election Day. 5 days as you and I sit here right now, and HarrisX Forbes has a new overnight poll talking about the state of the race between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. What sticks out to you? Break down the results for us.
Well, it's going to be a squeaker of an election. Essentially, the two candidates are in a statistical tie. When we look at, the core permutation of our horse race question, which is the four-way horse race: Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Cornel West, Jill Stein, and we factor in the leaners, or we push those undecideds to kind of make a choice today because they're going to have to make it pretty soon. We have Harris at 48%, Trump at 47%. So 1 percentage point difference. And despite the fact that this poll that we're releasing today together with Forbes has over 4,500 respondents, because we really wanted to look at the different groups or subsegments within the poll and see which way they are moving or not moving, it's still within the margin of error, right? So it's a statistical tie, whether you look at registered voters, 48 Harris, 47 Trump, whether you look at likely voters, 49 Harris, 48 Trump. And even when you look at battleground state voters, we have 910 battleground state voters within this survey. It's a statistical tie as well. So it's going to be intense heading into the election. And given these numbers and the unpredictability of which way this race will go, the wake of the election might be quite involved as well for many different reasons.
A statistical tie, but the numbers I have right in front of me, Harris is up +1, Harris is up plus 1.2, plus 1.6. Obviously, the smallest of lead there within the margin of error. But if you're the Trump campaign, you're seeing this. You're seeing you're down. So what are you thinking? Or are you thinking, it's high, we're still within the margin of error?
Well, these are good numbers for former President Trump, despite them showing him being down ever so marginally. If you think about where he was a month ago, Harris had a stronger lead across all of the different permutations of the ballot box test, or this key horse race question. And, they have gained, right? And they neutralized her advantage, and then neutralized her momentum. The second thing that you're thinking is that there's a lot of variance in the polls, right? When we released polling together last week, Trump was up by 2. Now Harris is up +1. These kinds of shifts are normal in the composition of a randomized survey. All they're telling us is that it's very, very tight. Now, one alarm bell, or one potential cause of concern for the Trump campaign, is the fact that Harris seems to have narrowed their advantage in these battleground states, or with battleground state voters. And this is a trend that has played out over many weeks, if not over many months. And ultimately, this is where the election will be decided. In our last poll, Trump was fairly solidly up with voters within these battleground states. Now it's narrowing. That tells me that there's a lot of get out the vote, and there's a lot of media push from the Harris campaign, with many ads that have hit in recent days within these states, and that is neutralizing the advantage that Trump had historically. So if I'm looking at this data, I'm seeing Trump grow in all the places where he doesn't really need to grow, right? And the popular vote, and I see his advantage tightening and potentially slipping in the battleground states, and that's cause for concern because, as irony would have it, we might be looking at a scenario that many are not speaking about, but is very valid, which is Trump potentially winning the popular vote in the election, but not winning the electoral college. And I say it's ironic because that's the position that Hillary Clinton was in 2016, where she won the popular vote but actually lost the electoral college. So this is something to keep an eye on from the perspective of both campaigns. Uh, but nevertheless, it's a very tight race across the board, wherever you look at it.
So when you look at these numbers from a wide view, statistical tie, but when you zoom in, when you read the tea leaves, there's some interesting tidbits here in the specific voting groups and the demographics. So can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. I mean, as the New York Times reports, 30% of voters have already voted to date, and 70% remain to vote. When we ask voters, are you planning to vote early and have you cast a ballot? On that specific question, Kamala Harris is winning by 20 points, 59% to 39% compared to Trump. So she has a very strong advantage via the Democratic machine with early voters. The big question is, can Trump narrow that advantage uh, with voters that will be voting over the next few days and on Tuesday? With voters that haven't cast their ballots yet, he's up 5 points, 50 to 45%. And obviously, with voters that are not planning to vote early, that's kind of a similar number as well. He's at 51%, whereas Harris at 45%. I will say, however, that there is an unseen advantage that Trump could have and he could tap into, which is with those voters that are not planning to vote, the couch potato voters, for lack of a better term. He's up by 7 points with them 47 to 40%. And if he's able to move these voters off the couch and into the voting booth, then that could make all the difference, especially given how tight everything is. So there's a playbook for either candidate to victory here. And again, the big question is, can Trump neutralize the early voting advantage that the Democratic machine and Kamala Harris have heading into Tuesday's election?
When you're looking at those couch potato voters, the voters who might or would lean Trump if they decide to get off the couch and actually vote, or if they stay home, that doesn't obviously give a vote for Trump. I mean, who are these people? Talk to us about the demo behind them.
Uh, Absolutely. I mean, look, these people are generally representative of the country, but they tend to be lower income voters. They tend to skew fairly heavily male, and they tend to skew white. And so they are, if you will, the stereotype of the MAGA voter, right? And Trump has historically been successful at pulling these voters out. This is why the polling historically has underplayed Trump's strengths. And so when you're looking at a statistical tie heading into the election and you're Trump's campaign, you're thinking, this is the best we've ever polled in any of the elections that they've been part of, 2016 and 2020. And there's a lot there to make them feel confident, right? With voters that have less than a 4 year formal education or college education, they're winning 51% to 45%. With voters that have a college degree or beyond, Harris has a 12-point advantage, 54% to 42%. So you see right there in this education breakdown the advantage that Trump has with these voters that more often than not don't vote. And these voters also tend to be in rural areas where Trump is up by 21%, 58% to 37% for Harris, and even in suburban areas where he has a very slight advantage, 49% to 47% for Harris. So again, this is one of those possible X factors in the election, but it's very difficult to gauge because these voters, they don't really take surveys. And when they do, you have to study them very carefully and usually with limited samples. What we're seeing, though, very clearly is that they lean Trump.
I want to talk about a group that Donald Trump has really made inroads with, and that's Latino voters, particularly Latino men. Just this past weekend, though, at an MSG rally Trump had, a comedian made what he called a joke about Puerto Rico. He called it a floating island of garbage. When you're thinking about states that have a heavy Puerto Rican population, Pennsylvania, 3.5% of the population over that is Puerto Rican. As we know, Pennsylvania is one of the most important states in this election. How badly do you think this blunder hurt Trump?
Well, I would say you hit the nail in the head in the sense that this will matter or could potentially matter in tightly contested states like Pennsylvania, but not so much nationally. And actually, when it comes to Hispanics, as you mentioned, Trump is winning Hispanic men 51% to Harris's 43%. So he's up 8 points with them. But Harris is doing very well with Hispanic women, 59% to 35%. So one of the areas that Trump could grow is with Hispanic women. And it's less about a comment on Puerto Rico because most Hispanic voters, they're not from Puerto Rico, and Hispanic voters or Latino voters, they're not monolithic, right? I mean, Cuban American voters behave very differently than Hispanic or Latino voters in the middle of Florida, and that's just the difference within one state. If you extrapolate it throughout the Sun Belt, it's very that you see a lot of difference and a lot of variance. But what we see in our polling is that Trump is narrowing the gap all with Hispanics. A month ago, Harris was winning Hispanics by 20 points. Right now, overall, she wins Hispanics by about 10 points, 52% to 42%. And that is an incredible performance for a Republican candidate with Hispanics. And, he's also doing well with black voters, right? Trump is consistently polling between 20 and 25% with black voters, which would mean that he's outperforming his actual voting percentage in 2020 by 2.5x. In our survey, he's at 24% to Harris's 71%. And this is a big liability for Kamala Harris as she heads down the home stretch, knowing also that black voters tend to vote the day of the election more so than early.
When we're looking at a race this tight, everything really does matter. And on Tuesday night, President Biden called Trump supporters garbage. He said it was a gaffe. It did not sound like a gaffe because he paused. But do you think that rises to the level of Hillary Clinton's deplorable comment? Do you think this will have any impact on the election? What does that look like?
Well, it's definitely not helpful. And again, it's not helpful with the couch potato voters. It's not helpful with regards to Trump's base, which tends to, as we said, skew lower income, lower education, more white. And these are the people that have been kind of singled out as being the deplorables, quote unquote, before by Democratic political figures. And it doesn't help with independent voters. They don't like that kind of a rhetoric. They don't like heated rhetoric, period. So this is where we see an interesting dynamic here, which is the 16% who still haven't made up their mind. They're swing voters. And also the voters who are unsure and on the fence, which are still around 8%. Trump is winning the don't know unsure vote 37% to 32%. So he's picking up vote share as he goes into election day. Independents are functionally tied. He has 43% support amongst independents. Harris has about 46% support amongst independents, with the rest being split with the third party candidates. And sure, a comment like that can matter. And again, the big sort of insight in the study is that 16% are still swing voters. So there could still be an October surprise between now and Tuesday that helps make up their mind or helps galvanize these voters, and they switch. And they could vote for one side when they were intending to vote for the other.
Donald Trump has kept the garbage commentary in the news cycle because on Wednesday night, he put on an orange safety vest. He had a Trump campaign decked out garbage truck. He went in there. He said 250 million people aren't garbage. He really denounced Biden's commentary there. Do you think that impacts the vote at all? Does that get the couch potato to vote? Does that have any impact on this election?
Well, it's powerful images for sure, and as you said, the goal is to keep the media cycle going on the comment. Just like the Democrats took a comedian's skit, but it was an opening skit, badly placed, I would say, for the Trump rally in Madison Square Garden, and they made a full media cycle out of it, right? So I don't think it necessarily reflects the position of either of the candidates, what other people in their orbit said about different voting groups, but it's certainly something that you can use in the media to convince voters at this last moment. Ultimately, the biggest gap that we see that I feel will determine the election is this massive gender gap between the two candidates. Trump is winning men by 10 points, 53 to 43%, and Harris is winning women by 11 points, 53% to 42%. So in the last several days heading into the election, Trump has got to focus on women, especially suburban women, and try to convince them to vote for him. And in the last several days heading into the election, Harris has got to do something about men and has got to do something to correct the perceived wrongs of the Democratic Party and the Democratic rhetoric that men feel. That's why they're breaking for Trump so strongly and for the Republican candidate. And so both of the candidates have work to do on the gender basis, but this is one of the bigger gaps. And it's the type of a gap that we don't really see when we look at age breakdowns. I mean, when we look at 18 to 29 years old, Harris is winning them by 7 points, 50 to 43%. That's to be expected. It's within range. 30 to 44-year-olds, they are essentially tied, 46% for Trump, 48% for Harris. 45 to 64%, again tied, 48 Trump, 49 Harris. And then 65 plus, Trump is winning by 5 points, 52% to 47%. So the differences in gender are significantly steeper than the differences in age, and this really brings you to issues like abortion for women, but also the economy and crime and safety, and also for men, tabletop issues, jobs, employment, inflation, but also cultural issues, right? And it's these are all at play in this final 3 days, 4 days stretch as we head into the election.
Dritan, every day between now and election day, I'm going to quote you for something that you said a few weeks ago, but I want to get your opinion on it each day because the numbers are coming in, they're coming in hot, and every day is more important than the next. So a few weeks ago, you told me that Donald Trump had the edge. However, Vice President Kamala Harris had the momentum. Last week, you told me Trump still has the edge. It remains to be seen who has the momentum. Now, looking at these numbers from this overnight poll, who has the edge and who has the momentum?
I think that I will anchor on another quote or framing that I had in conversation together, which is the election has always been Trump v. Trump and Harris v. Harris. I would say that neither really has the momentum and neither really has the edge right now. There's multiple paths to victory for both of them. And this really boils down to three factors. Who makes the least number of mistakes between now and election day? If there is an October surprise, how do they respond to that October surprise? And really brute force. And what I mean by that is get out the vote and media pushes, convincing that 16% of swing voters to really come out and decide. But I do want to convey one thing to viewers, right? That despite the heated rhetoric and despite all of the agita that our elections, our modern elections, seem to involve, American democracy is alive and kicking. And it's going to come down to the 16% who are yet to make up their mind. They tend to skew independent. They are issues based voters, and they are going to make a very calculated decision on who the next president of the United States is. And it's not going to be based on passion. It's not going to be based on demagoguery. It's not going to be based on rhetoric. It's going to be based on who they think it's going to do a better job for the next 4 years. And that's something for all of us to cherish because, you know, for all of its kinks and issues and problems, American democracy is working. But also to keep in mind that however this election is decided, and it will be a very, very tight election, the marginal voter would have spoken. So, A, people should go out and vote and make sure that they are heard. But B, democracy sometimes comes down to the vote of one person or a handful of people, and that result has to be respected, and we have to move forward for the sake of the democracy and the sake of building up and moving ahead, moving the country ahead. So I think that there are positive tones to this polling and to this data, but it is going to be a squeaker. And this is going to be one of the most difficult races for pollsters to call, for the exit polling to call, all the way to the last minute on Tuesday night.
Well, I love that sentiment. This is a close one, but American democracy is alive and kicking. I love that, especially this election season. Dritan, I know we will be talking soon. I already can't wait for our next conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.